my glove on. It's another chilly morning here in my garden. Thank goodness there's no snow though, and I'm desperately looking around the garden for something that I can pick to put into the mini arrangement I'm going to make. To find anything. Oh gosh, this is so difficult, isn't it? The problems of a spring garden. Have you got anything growing in your spring garden? Let me know in the comments. Hello and welcome there. YouTube live normally at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, but this morning I've had my hair cut, so a little bit of a late start. So welcome one and all. Let me know in the comments whether you're watching live, leave me the hashtag live, and if you're catching up later on, leave me the hashtag replay and we can have a chat in the comments as soon as I get the notification. So I have cheated slightly in today's project. I'm just thinking, I cannot imagine when our garden is ever going to have any flowers in it. And let me know whether you've got any flowers in your garden. Have you got a profusion of daffodils or tulips or grape hyacinths or snowdrops? I look around everyone else's front gardens as I walk to and fro into town, and I am very envious of what I see. Good morning, Linda. It is lovely to have you here. I have done a little bit of a cheat though, you know, in my mind's eye of what I would like to have in my perfect garden. And I was going to walk down the garden carrying this bunch of blossom, but I've put so much water in it, the bucket is really heavy. So it's blossom season, the beginning of blossom season. Do you know what this blossom is called? Let me know in the comments. So as you may or may not know, I've set myself a challenge to work through the pages of Julia Clement's first book, which I think was published in 1950, called Fun with Flowers, and the subtitle is a treatise on flower arrangements. So Joan, you've got a full garden: daffodils, crocus, snowdrops, a few others. Oh, you lucky thing. I have been to the top end of our garden, our little woodland edge, as my husband likes to call it, and we've got a few meagre daffodils there. Some of them have been beaten down in the rain, I'm guessing, or perhaps the dog's been trampling them. A tiny crocus, you know, there's about 3 crocuses. Can you see them right up there? 3 purple crocuses, and one little snowdrop as well. It's not snowdrop, it's a primrose, so it's very disappointing. So I'm going to cheat for today's project, but before we get into today's project, I have been buying, so do I dare take my gloves off? So once a month here in Faversham we have an antiques and vintage market, and it's probably been running for 3 or 4 years. So we have it in our marketplace. So those of you who don't know, I live in a medieval market town, and we've got a guild hall in the marketplace which is raised up on stilts, and we have market stalls underneath. So Tuesday, today, is market day. So as I went to get my hair cut, the fruit and veg man was setting up. There was a clothing stall. There weren't that many stores actually. I think the people have been put off by this expectation of a cold snap and potentially snow tomorrow. I do not believe we're going to get snow. Particularly here in the southeast of England, it very rarely snows, but it has been bitterly cold. So I like to have a look around the antiques market. It's filled with so many lovely, beautiful things. I've got a couple of stores I really like going to. One of them always has a £1 rummage bucket, but I didn't find anything there today. On Sunday, but I did find some test tubes. So those of you who've been following along with my Zoom flower classes, you will know that we've done quite a few sessions on going foam free. So those of you who perhaps don't know, the green blocks of flower foam, you might know them as the trade name Oasis. There's other makes available, are single-use plastics, so they're not they're not very good for the environment. So we're just trying to move away from our reliance on single-use plastic and to embrace other ways of flower arranging. And that can be looking backwards to when our aunts and grandmothers and mothers may well have used flower frogs, the pin holders, or chicken wire, and then looking forwards as well, and that's where test tubes come into it. So you'll find a lot of contemporary design work, very modern looking design work, uses test tubes. So if you belong to a flower club and you sign up for a workshop at your flower club and it asks you to look for test tubes, of course you can buy them online, but don't forget to look out for them at your vintage markets and even your antique stores as well. I went to an antique shop near me recently and I can't remember how much I paid for these test tubes. I have a feeling I paid £2 for 6, so it's 3 for £1, and I've bought 3 that were plain glass, and then I bought 3 that looked slightly more exciting. They had some, I don't know if you can see that, it's got some measurements on the side, so 10 millimetre tube like that. And then I have also bought online at various points glass test tubes. Normally though, I would say that if you do go to a flower class, the sort of standard height, if there is a standard, is probably half that height. So a 5 centimetre test tube would be a really good sized go-to test tube to go to. And part of the reason for that is that the short length means you can hide it in your mechanics, so whatever structure you are using to support your test tubes, it'll be hidden. The longer they are, the more obvious they become in your arrangement, and they may or may not detract slightly from the look that you're going for. So having said that, that was quite a big test tube, so a big stretch between thumb and forefinger. I'm guessing that's at least 10 if not 12 centimetres long. So the test tubes that I bought at the vintage markets at the weekend are even bigger. Just look at that. So compared to the little skinny ones, so Joan's saying there that she finds that the glass ones break very easily. Yes, they do. I would say I have had breakages, but more often than not, that's down to my own heavy-handedness and clumsiness. So I've had a couple where I've put them away in my big flower arranging cupboard, and then I've opened the door and they've fallen off the shelf, and then I've trodden on them. So yes, they do break. You can get the plastic ones. And if you go to, depending on your florist or the wholesaler that you go to, you may find that you quite commonly called orchid tubes, because orchids and anthuriums, which are the heart-shaped flower, quite often seen as that red glossy look, they almost look plastic themselves, come with this tube attached because they need to be transported in water. And they also then have on top of the tube a little lid so it holds the water in. So it's a good idea if you do have, if you're regularly buying orchids or anthuriums, that you save all those tubes instead of putting them into the bin or into your recycling, and then you can reuse them again. So it's we're trying to say no to plastics because we understand what harmful impact it's got on the environment, but that's it does mean if you've got a plastic to try and reuse it in order that it doesn't go straight back into the ecosystem of the manufacturing world and the world of recycling and composting down and that kind of thing. Of course, plastic doesn't compost down, and part of the problem is that you end up with the little microplastics that then leach into the soils and then into our rivers, and then that's where the damage is caused with getting into our fish and so on. So look, a monster test tube there. So I bought a pair of these. They were £3 each, and I felt rather brave, as I said, could I have £5 for 2? So I quite like those because they were quite striking. And I thought, what am I going to do with them now? Because, of course, as test tubes, they got round bottoms, so you can't stand them upright. So I thought I would make a little test tube bouquet. So bouquet in I'm stretching the definition of what a bouquet is. So I thought what would be quite nice was how I could display my test tubes in order that, and I think Joan's just said there that she's clumsy as well, and that's where her breakages has occurred. Instead of keeping my test tubes sort of rolling round in a dish, making them vulnerable to breaking, could I, number one, store them in a more purposeful, mindful way, And then perhaps in storing them, could I make them decorative so I could actually be using them? So I think it's the best thing to do with your flower arranging paraphernalia. You end up collecting so much stuff, and you put it in the cupboard, you forget about it because you close the cupboard doors because you want everything to be tidied away. Sometimes I think you need to, in order to ensure that you use what you buy and make it more, better value for money, so you get more and more uses out of it, is to display it in a decorative way so it can kind of be hidden in plain sight. And then when you want to use it for a particular project, it's there waiting because it's always in your eye line. Of course, there's a balance to be reached in everything because you don't want your house to be totally over the top and stuffed full of clutter. So a little project for you, and see how you get on. And if you decide to dig your orchid tubes or your glass test tubes out of storage at the back of your flower arranging cupboard, why don't you post a photograph in my Facebook group, and there's a link to that in the notes underneath the video, and we can see how creative you can come up with, lots of creative ideas you can come up with to make use of what you've already got. So although I have been buying pieces of things, it is nice to make use of what you've got. So at the moment, my test tubes have been stored in a paper bag, which I've got rolled up and left on the worktop in my workshop because I know I need to put them away. So I'm really bad at doing that. I have these beautifully arranged cupboards, and as soon as I use anything, instead of opening the cupboard door and putting it back, I put it on the side. And then eventually the sides of my workshop become so full I can't put anything more down, and that's my cue to put things away properly, go through everything and make sure I actually want to keep it. And then I sometimes will redonate stuff to the charity shop, and I have this whole cycle of things that arrive in my house, are used, and then leave my house. There's always, I like to think a little bit of space and a little bit of spare cash for always bringing something new and exciting into my house. So one of the ways I'm thinking of displaying these test tubes is in a jam jar. So this isn't actually a jam jar, not any old jam jar. It's one of these French jars. And I think I was given this by a friend, but locally to me, they are selling these £5 each. So they look absolutely beautiful. Sometimes you might see them with, planted up with spring flowering bulbs, and you could use it as a pen pot. You put your floristry scissors in it. Even that looks quite pretty and purposeful if you had that on your kitchen windowsill. They're rather peculiar though as jam jars because there's no screw top here, so I'm guessing it must have been a metal pull lid on it. So I don't know how you ever resealed that in between uses. So it would take you a little bit of time to get through the jam, unless it was used more as a canning jar. So you put the lid on and perhaps you'd have preserved apples or something like that in it. I'm not entirely sure. So a simple way of storing your test tubes would be to stack them up inside your jar. And even if you didn't have these on display, if you had a flower arranging cupboard, then at least they would be upright. Oops, that was the wrong way up. And they wouldn't be rolling around all over the place. So that would be one idea of storage. Plain and simple, but we don't want everything to be too plain and too simple. I want to take our storage and our flower arranging skills up a level. So what I have decided to do is to take the same idea, but to arrange my taller test tubes in this little vase. So what would you call that vase? Is it a goldfish vase? Is that what you know it as? Or do you know it as a rose bowl? So quite often we think of the rose bowl as being a more traditional piece of glassware, something that perhaps is cut glass, and perhaps a heavier weight to it, perhaps even a leaded crystal kind of thing. This is a floristry vase. It came from the charity shop, so I would have only paid £1 or £2 for it. But they were really fashionable a few years ago for weddings, and you could have really, really big vases for these goldfish bowl vases. Quite popular this time of year because you could put your tulips in it. So you know when your tulips, you put them in water as you always do, and you know that they move and grow towards the light, and you can sort of, well, not so much stop them, but sort of restrain them a little bit by actually arranging them inside your vase. This one's probably a bit too small for this, but if you were interested in doing that, get yourself a slightly bigger rose bowl, and then recut your stems of your tulips, pull off the outer leaves, you know, that really big outer leaf that you get, and I would probably leave just the top two leaves top near the flower head, and that would mean taking off the big leaf, and there's probably one other leaf as well. And then I would say, do not put your tulips in water at that point, because you want your tulip stems to be ever so slightly, I don't want to say floppy, but you want to be able to circle them round your bowl without the stems snapping, and you can't do that with a turgid stem, one that's has its stem end recut and it's taken up water and is nice and stiff and straight, because you'll end up snapping the stem. But when you've got them a little bit floppy, they've just got a bit of flexibility to them, and what you would then do is I tend to put the flower head in first so it lands where I want it to land, and then curl the stem inside. And you just want to make sure that the stem ends are pointing down to the bottom of the vase, because you'll need to make sure that eventually when you put water in the vase that the stem ends are in water. So you've got, I think a minimal amount of water looks best, but of course you're going to have to put enough water into the vase to make sure those cut ends are actually in water. And then what you end up with is a vase that almost looks like it's got goldfish swimming in it. You know, if you had a yellow or an orange tulip, you'd have these sort of egg-shaped blobs apparently floating in the vase, but they'd be all around the edge with the stems circling around. And that's a really, really modern and dramatic way of arranging your tulips if you don't want them in a vase and wiggling and woggling and doing their own thing. If you want to constrain them a little bit more, they will still continue to grow around a bit, and it may be that every few days you might want to go in with your scissors and cut off a little bit at the end and sort of pull it back into shape, or you might just, if the flower heads are popping up out of the container, that you might actually physically need to just run your fingers down to scoop your flower heads back down into the vase. So you'll never win with tulips. They will always get the better of you. But that isn't what I'm going to be doing today. I am going to be positioning my tall test tubes in this vase using the technique that you would use for a hand-tied bouquet, where you cross the stems over each other in order that the test tubes don't flop around too much. So let me see if I can bring the camera down a little bit so you can see more closely what I'm doing. So in this little tray in front of me, I've got some of the flowers I'm going to be using. So I've just got the tail ends of my forced bulbs. Look, I've only got 3 flower heads left, so I'm going to probably cut those. And then I have got my grape hyacinths just coming into flower. I might just take 1 or 2 of those and a few little bits from the garden, plus the blossom that I showed you. So let's take the test tubes. Be careful not to smash them. I wouldn't want to be doing that. And literally get a test tube, place it in container. I've got my towel there. I was worried about getting a wet bottom when I sat down. And then crossing it over like this inside the container like that. If you had 3, it would give you a nice tripod effect, and they really would support each other. And then having got the basic one, those in as my sort of anchor points, I'm then going to go through and add in my other test tubes. So I'm sort of trying to get them to swirl around. So I've got 3 in there, and if you use your imagination, you might sort of detect a vague, 3 points. It's got the circle heads are giving me a vague triangle, and then I'll go round and slot in the test tubes. So they, instead of them sitting upright like they were in this jar, they are standing at a more open or sort of a lazy angle, in the way that a bouquet would, that splay out and look slightly more natural. So here I might add in the test tube that's got a little bit of detail on it. That'll show up in the when I look at the vase on the side. This one here is quite nice. It's got again got the measuring thing, but it's got a tiny little spout on it just there. So just a little bit of interest. So I'm thinking that it would look quite attractive just sitting like that on my kitchen windowsill as storage, but also a little bit purposeful as well, that I can get the last of my flowers in. So this is sort of a souped up version of that, having your jam jar of flowers on the kitchen windowsill when you've been making an arrangement and you've got a few sprigs that are just leftovers and you don't want to throw them away. So I need water, so I'm going to be using my teapot. Another charity shop find. This is my Tea Lara, which cost me, I think it was £1.50. And when I looked online, they sell for £27. So I was quite pleased to get this. So I tend to use this teapot in the summertime when I'm making herbal teas from the garden, so I can see what's going on in my teapot. But latterly, we're using it to fill up our 1 cup kettle as a sort of energy saving device, that the kettle only boils 1 cup at a time. And I've spilled a bit, but of course I could always put some flowers into the main body of the jar of the goldfish bowl, the rose bowl as well. So I've got my bowl in there. I might just raise that up a little bit on there so you can see what I am doing. Yes, I just need to make sure now I don't turn violently in any particular direction, otherwise things are going to get lost. So I have got a few meagre trimmings from the garden. The little Arum Pictum Italicum leaf with that little marbling. I have purposefully chosen the smallest leaves I could find because I'm conscious of the fact that my rose bowl is quite small, my test tubes are quite narrow, and the little fine delicate flowers I've got are also quite small, and I didn't want to overwhelm my jam jars by having something really big inside them. So it may be, you don't need to have any greenery, but as you saw when I was looking around the garden earlier, that I just have such meagre pickings in my garden. So I'm going to crop from my forced tater-tates. So I have been deadheading these, actually looking at that. That's not good enough, it's all dried out. So I'm going to come to this one here. So I'm going to take a long leggy one and, just let it sit really, wherever it's going to go. I might just take the longest ones and then save myself just one single daffodil to have on my kitchen worktop. Where am I going to put these ones? So with it being the glassware and a clean modern look, you don't need to have loads and loads of flowers. It's just little, just the meagre offerings that we've got at the moment. And of course, if you have got a beautiful garden full of loads of things, you could really go for it. So I'm slightly hesitant about cutting these because they're absolutely beautiful, these grape hyacinths. But as I cut that one there, it's making me actually look at the plants. And where I was just seeing the 5 flower heads, as I cut down, I can see 1 flower head down here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have got more, and I probably wouldn't have noticed those if I hadn't thought about cutting anything down. So that was sinking a little bit there. I can get it to hang out a little bit. I just need to make sure if I'm not getting the flower stem, it was sinking right to the bottom of the test tube. If I want it to come a bit higher, I have to sort of balance it on the outside edge of the test tube like that. And that means I need to make sure I've got enough water in, that the stem is actually in water. So I think that will stay there. Perhaps we should have another one as well. Now I know I've got a few more growing. I'm going to go right down to the bottom so I can actually cut that down. Now rather unintentionally, I've got 2 of that and 2 of the other, which we don't. Actually, I've got 2 of everything. 2 leaves, 2 grape hyacinths, 2 of the tater-tate daffodils, and florists and flower arrangers start to get a bit of a wobble about here because we prefer to have odd numbers, 3s and 5s. But because we've got quite a modern arrangement, we break the rules and we just go ultra modern. So don't be too bound by the rules. Don't let it stifle your creativity. And literally, what have I got growing at the back of the garden? A single primrose. Just look at that. So again, it's got such a short stem. literally, it's less than the size of my little finger, but I can just drop it into that test tube, and because it's got quite an open head to it, it's resting on the top of the test tube like this. So again, as long as I've got enough water in there, it will stay, and it'll be still have water, and the petals extending out over the test tubes will keep it in place. Oh, I just missed that comment. It disappeared, so it'll come back in a moment. So I'll come back in a moment. So a little bit of heather. I don't like heather. I think we probably got it in the garden because my husband gardens for wildlife. So there'll be some particular, I guess it's because it's flowering now. It's a source of nectar for the pollinators. So I have just pinched off the little bits of leaf down at the bottom so that they don't end up in the water. And then I can place that as a single stem. That's got a little bit of a curve on it, so it's coming out quite nicely at the side. I did pick a sorry state of affairs. I think it's broken. That's probably why it was. It did look a bit sorry for itself at the bottom of the garden. So this is a crocus. So I was hoping I'd be able to get a crocus in the bottom, but it was either broken when I cut it, or I've cut it, bent it in transit. So that's going to go on the compost heap. And then a tiny little daffodil, which again was lying on the floor. So it's either got, it's got two chances. It's either going to recover or it's not going to recover. But let's give it a chance of recovering. So I'm going to put that into the bottom there. And then let's get some of this beautiful blossom. So do you know the name of this blossom? So the blossom I'm noticing around me, we have some lovely, I've cut that long length, and now I'm going to do that to get rid of the petals and flowers that will be in the water. I don't want them rotting and discolouring the water. I'm noticing that crabapple blossoms first, so we've got some lovely crabapple trees in town. This is something I picked up from the roadside verge, and it is actually cherry plum. So do you ever notice that, you might notice this on the motorway, and particularly Linda, because I know you're not so far from me, that you go down the motorway and then in the summertime, late summer, you'll see all the little fruits just on the hard shoulder, and that is the cherry plum. And also one of the trees along our street is a cherry plum, and it gets the fruit on it, but I've never picked the fruit or eaten it or made jam out of it. Perhaps that's something I ought to look at doing. So another bit of blossom. This one is just in bud, so it'll be flowering later on. So just for pleasing interest. It's almost like I'm doing a botanical drawing, a sort of Victorian botanical drawing, but using a very modern look to it. I think I can get away with cutting these stems slightly longer in order that perhaps with that big test tube it stands up better, and that does look better. So let's be brave and go longer. Now the thing about blossom is it looks lovely out here on my patio table. Can you put the name of the leaf used in the... Yes, I will put it in the in the Facebook group, Joan. Arum for lily, pictum, and mine is italic. Well, I don't actually know the italicum. So it's that 3-part word, a name, and I just know it's arum, pictum, italicum. But you'll recognise that from lots of flower ranges use that. Now I don't like that bit there. I've got loads of blossom. I'm going to take that bit out. I think that one was quite sort of heavy, visually dominant. We're still using our principles and elements of design where we can, but really just take some test tubes or a line. If you haven't got test tubes, perhaps some jars out of your recycling, all the different shapes and sizes of the jars, and perhaps just line them up on your windowsill and have one sprig of each. But yes, the only downside with the blossom is, I would say, oh, Joan, it's because when I trained to be a demonstrator for NAFAS, we had to learn the plant names, and they kind of get drilled into you. And you'll notice that I don't give you the name of anything I don't know. So that's the way of glossing over it. I only tell you the plant names that I know. And of course, because I knew I was going to talk to you, I did make the effort of looking it up again. So I have had this blossom in a cream coloured enamel bucket, but you'll notice I've actually got it on my patio table. I haven't got this indoors, and the reason for that is that indoors the blossom blooms too quickly. So I cut it all when it just looked like little knobbles. It had a hint of colour, but looked like miniature snowballs going along it. I didn't cut it when it was in flower, because it would shorten the life that I could enjoy it. And the reason I don't have it actually in the house is because as it matures, with the warmth of the living room, that the plant will do its natural thing. So it will lose its petals and it shatters all over the place. No, Joan, you're saying, is it from the hawthorn tree? No, it's not. And I think the nature of blossom is that when you actually look at it, it all looks, it's all a variation on a theme, isn't it? This is when I really need my husband here to explain, because it's his area of life, really. But it's got a simple form now. Let's see what I can remember. Do I remember when he talks to me about it? It's got, let's take those off. The best flowers for pollinating, for pollinators. I'm not sure that's going to show up. Can you see that that's just a really simple shape? It's almost like a star-shaped flower. If you were going to draw a flower and scribble a note, but that's how you might draw a flower, a 5-petal flower like that, because the insects can easily get down to the pollen in it, and to get the nectar in all that life cycle. You tell I'm struggling really with here, trying to tell you something I don't really know much about. And then you've got the little bits of pollen. Perhaps I'll put a close-up photograph in the group as well. I don't know if you can see this. The little stamens sticking up, they've got the tiny little bits of pollen, so much as it is for a lily. So you've seen the lily, haven't you? That also is a 5-petaled flower with quite an open throat, and you can imagine that in nature the insect would come along, it would land on this simple looking flower, so it wouldn't have to ruffle down like into a carnation where you've got too many petals going on, and then it would go down to the neck of the flower, get the nectar, and it would, at the same time, the pollen, the stamens tickle their bottoms, and that's what you use to pollinate the flower, and that's what you need to create the fruit. It's like every area of life. And you say my husband is very knowledgeable. He is very knowledgeable, but it also, I think, is probably going back to basic biology. And of course, we did our biology classes, up to the age of 16 or so, and then you forget it all, and then it's only later in life that you think, actually, I can kind of see what the relevance was of learning all about that. So I would absolutely love it. I must ask my daughter, actually, if she can lend me her textbooks or show me online where she's learning about pollination and things like that. So yes, the flowers are beautiful, but this is why we have quite a modest garden, because my husband gardens for wildlife. He doesn't garden for flowers per se. Of course, he likes flowers and the value they have in the garden as a wildlife garden. But whenever I say, oh, could I just, could you plant this for me, that for me, the other, his first question is number one, does it suit our soil and our local climate? And, what value has it got for wildlife? And of course, lots of the flowers that you see in floristry are lots of, multiple petals. And his view is that for pollinators, he would prefer to grow native species and to have that very simple flower head structure to it, in order that it enables the pollinators to do their job. So yes, a little bit of biology, and I'm sure if you're watching this, I would love it if you could explain in simple terms what actually is happening instead of my made up version of what I think is happening. But it's along those lines. But please don't base all your GCSE revision homework on what I've just said, because you may not pass those exams. So that is pretty much as I'm going to do. I have just used what I had available, so meagre offerings. And when I get this indoors, I'm going to make that little grape hyacinths stick out at a slightly more jaunty angle so I can actually enjoy it. Otherwise, it's sort of getting lost, it falls down the plug hole like that. So Thank you so much for joining me this morning. For those of you who have signed up for Zoom flower class, the classes where I'm teaching you how to teach your own flower classes, we will be meeting in just a short amount of time at 12 noon. And for those of you in my Facebook group, I will be live in the Facebook group on at 12 o'clock on Friday, and then as usual I'll be posting a pre-recorded video on YouTube at 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon. So if you're at all interested in my live flower classes, especially if you live in Kent, just leave me a comment and I can let you know how you can book up through adult education. And if you feel that you've missed out on flower classes because you're just new to the channel, I do have all the long series of Zoom flower classes I've been doing for the last couple of years are now available to download from my website. So they're packaged up into groups of 8, 9 and 10 videos depending on what we were doing at the time. So that should keep you busy for a little while. And of course, once you've got them downloaded, you can either binge watch them all, or you could pace them out over the next few weeks and months and learn how to do some flower arranging in a more creative style from perhaps your usual cut and plonk from the supermarket. So I shall say goodbye. I'm going to titivate this a little bit, get it all positioned exactly how I want, and then I shall take a photograph and I'll post it on the community tab pages here on YouTube and also in my Facebook group. So I shall say goodbye, and whatever you're doing, I hope you are enjoying your day, and fingers crossed. I love a bit of snow, so fingers crossed we will get our snow overnight. It may well snow, but I don't think it's going to settle because it's just too damp on the ground and in the air at the moment. But fingers crossed, we can always dream. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.